I'm Norah O'Donnell with Gayle King and John Dickerson. We start with this morning. Sri Lanka's president is asking his country's police chief and defense minister to resign after officials failed to act on warnings ahead of Sunday's terror attacks. At least 359 people are now reported killed in a string of suicide bombings at churches and hotels on Easter Sunday. Police say 60 people have been arrested in connection with the attacks.
The U.S. Embassy in Sri Lanka says it had no prior knowledge of any threats. The ambassador said this morning she believes terrorist groups are still plotting possible attacks inside that country. ISIS released this video claiming that it shows a group of suicide bombers that took part in the attacks after pledging allegiance to the terror group. ISIS has offered no other evidence to back up its claim of responsibility. CBS News senior national security contributor Michael Morell joins us from Washington. He's a former deputy director and acting director of the CIA and is the host of Intelligence Matters podcast. Good morning, Mike.
Good morning.
So 2 days passed before ISIS claimed responsibility. What does this tell you about what role ISIS may or may not have actually played in this bombing?
So, John, there's two possibilities, right? One is that they somehow directed the attack. The other is that they simply inspired it. The fact that it took them 2 days to claim responsibility suggests to me that it might be the latter, inspired, rather than the former, directed, because if they directed it, they would have known from the get-go that they played a role. So it's suggestive of inspiration rather than direction, but I think it's going to take some time for us to figure out that exactly.
It was so well coordinated. I mean, the number of attacks, does that suggest some foreign interference or help?
So it does on the surface, but I think one thing we have to be conscious of is that the Sri Lankan security services are not strong. I think it's even fair to say they're inept. So you have to look at the capabilities of the terrorist group relative to the security service that they're running up against. What's interesting to me is less the fact that they didn't do enough with the warning they were given, and more of the fact that all of this happened right underneath their nose and they didn't see any of it. That's more interesting to me, and it really suggests that they need significant strengthening as a security service.
I want to get your take on a couple big stories out this morning that involve Russian interference in our elections. First, Jared Kushner, one of the president's closest advisors, was here in New York. He rarely does interviews. And he suggested yesterday that the multiple investigations into Russian election interference were more harmful to American democracy than essentially the original interference. Let's listen to what he said.
You look at, what Russia did, buying some Facebook ads to try to sow dissent and do it, and it's a terrible thing. But I think the investigations and all of the speculation that's happened for the last 2 years has had a much harsher impact on our democracy than a couple of Facebook ads.
Mm-hmm. Was it just Facebook ads that Russia was involved in?
No, the Russians, across a whole range of activities, from stealing information and giving it to WikiLeaks to trying to get inside state and local voting systems, to the use of their overt media, RT and Sputnik, to everything they did on social media, it was a very significant and extensive interference. And Jared is trying to downplay this a little bit by saying a few ads, right? We're talking about ads that reached over 100 million people. So this was a very significant attack, and the investigation never would have occurred had the attack never occurred. So I think the attack is the most significant thing here.
Mm-hmm. And go ahead. Well, it was, you're right, multifaceted. They were trying to get in lots of different points. And of course, the reason this is important is not just what happened in the past, but what is happening in the future. And the New York Times has a piece this morning that said former Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen was told by Mick Mulvaney, the acting chief of staff, not to bring up new Russian interference efforts in front of the president because it would make the president angry. What does that tell you? How significant is that?
So it's absolutely clear to me, and it's absolutely clear to U.S. intelligence officials, and we know this from public testimony by the Director of National Intelligence, that it is highly likely that the Russians are going to come back and play a significant role in the 2020 election, and that we should expect new approaches, new things that they're going to do to try to get around the defenses that we put in place. That means to me there needs to be a very significant effort on the part of the U.S. government to defend ourselves, and that really requires requires the leadership of the president. And if he's not providing that leadership, then I really worry about whether our government is going to be ready for the attack that is almost certainly coming.
All right, you'll be calling the White House to let them know that when?
Right away. Thank you.
All right, Michael Morell, always good to see you.
It really is some stunning reporting in the New York
important what you're
Times
saying.
about whether
Yeah.
you have a White House-led, a multifaceted
Exactly.
way to push back against these cyber attacks and other things. Michael Morell, always good to have you. Thank you so much.